Welcome back, Strategic Angling fans. This is episode 30-something of Strategic Angling, presented by K&K True Value of Benton, North Iowa. I am your host and resident idiot, Brady Hanna, and I am joined by two guys who do catch fish, JJ Patton and Chuck Pfizer. So today we're talking about a technique that I quite enjoy sometimes, or really despise other times, and that is the punching, or heaver cover flipping, but traditionally called punching. JJ is going to start with history, and then we're going to give you a breakdown of the when, why, what tackle, all that. So what do you got for us?
Near as I can tell, there's not a lot of history on punching. I think it's been a fairly recent development. I think it kind of came out of necessity. In one of our previous episodes, we talked about hollow body frogs, and people would find active fish in a mat or in a particular area of thick vegetation that might eat a frog on Friday, and they come back Saturday and they would not get bit. And I think it kind of developed a lot on the West Coast, California Delta in particular, where guys would develop ways to get a lure to those bass that may not be as active as they were the day or the week prior. And therefore, what they came up with is use a large heavy weight and a soft plastic bait, Texas rigged, so that you could literally pitch or flip the lure out there and punch it through the top of the vegetation to get underneath. And then you could present a lure slower and underwater, so that if they weren't coming up to eat a frog, but there's fish there, they could still access those fish, capture those fish, and win tournaments. And I think that's kind of the history of it. I don't think it really goes a lot further back. I think it kind of spun off of the frog, to be honest with you, because guys started realizing what's in those mats, but that they wouldn't always bite the frog. And so they kind of, out of necessity, developed this punching technique with a large, initially lead weight, and with the advent of tungsten, it's become a lot better because it's thinner, or it's smaller per weight, so it gets through the thick stuff better. Guys in Florida, Florida and California, I guess, is kind of where it kind of started. And
it definitely made the bass more accessible.
Yeah.
When they weren't eating the frog. So.
Okay, well that's a great little history lesson on the punch. I see it, very frequently, like you mentioned, Florida. Guys are just utilizing that a lot more than they were even 5 years ago. So,
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about time of year. I know we just talked frog. I'm guessing it's similar conditions. Tell us when you guys are looking to go to a punch.
Yeah, same time.
Else.
I actually use punching for exactly what JJ said. For instance, JJ and I fished a tournament this weekend. In practice, we could get them to hit the frog once in a while. Well, in the tournament, they wouldn't hit the frog at all. So we had to resort to punching. And the good thing about it is once you catch a few on a frog, there's fish there.
Right.
They're just not actively eating a topwater bait. So the only way to access them is using a punch weight, for me a straight shank hook, and to punch through the mat to get it down there. Now the key is, when you're punching, is you kind of got to study the mat, because there's mats that you go through the mat and it's open water underneath, and then there's mats that are just solid grass the whole way.
Yep.
Those are a lot more difficult to catch the fish, and a lot of times those fish aren't in there. They don't like to be restrained like that, so they like a little bit of openness. But you can punch from a foot of water to
30 foot of water.
Yeah, but around here, basically, it's a foot to 3 foot. It's pretty shallow. So usually you're using for instance, we're using a 3/4 ounce tungsten weight. You can use all the way up to, depending on how thick the mat is 3/4 ounce all the way up to 2 ounces. Now, once you get to those bigger weights, people have to realize when you set the hook, that weight does hit the fish's mouth. So those big 2 ounce weights do have a tendency to not hook up as easy as the smaller weight. So you want to use the smallest weight possible to get through that mat, because your hookup percentage will be much better. Also too, when you do use your weight, you do want to peg it. It's just basically a bobber stop that you feed onto your braid and that does pin the weight next to the bait.
And the more weight you're using, the more bobber. You might have to go to 2 bobber stops.
You can, but I think for me, I don't like to do that because I think when you do set the hook, you want this weight to move and get out of the way. You don't want the weight to stay there because I think that
It gives them more leverage.
it gives them more leverage. So you want the weight to move. The only, I guess, what I would do, the only way that I would put 2 on is maybe if I'm using a big, heavy 1.5 to 2 ounce where the weight might be moving the bobber stop.
Right.
But for the most part, I want to just try to use 1 because I do want the weight to slide up when I set the hook.
When they bite it, you want it to slide, but you don't want it to slide every time you flip, because
Right.
otherwise you'll be...
Exactly.
So you got to kind of adjust. They're
Yeah.
all also different styles. I mean, they have the bobber stop ones. You have the longer, skinnier ones that actually
Right.
go into the weight. In the old days, we used to stick a toothpick in it, in
Yeah.
the,
And you still
in the
can do
backside, and you can still
Yeah.
do that. And that, but yeah, I agree. You don't want it to slide a lot. But there's no shame in it sliding after you set the
Right.
hook, because then it doesn't give that fish leverage with that weight right by their mouth.
And there's all different sizes of bobber stops. You got bobber stops for fluorocarbon, for monofilament sizes, and then you got it for braid as well. But then the next component would be the hook,
Yep.
which is probably the most important part besides maybe the rod and the line. The hook is what catches the fish.
And what hook is that?
This is actually I think it's a brand new hook from Gamakatsu.
Yep.
It's I think it's the G Power.
It's the G Power heavy cover.
Yeah, this is a
punch
5/0 straight shank heavy hook. I use 65-pound braid on an 8-foot rod, heavy rod, and this hook does not straighten out. We caught a lot of fish on it this weekend, and this is the actual hook I used, and it is just like it came out of the package.
Yeah, and we pulled some torque on it on some pads and some
Yep.
snags, and it never straightened out.
No, it brought the pads back.
In fact, your 65-pound line broke before that hook bent one time.
And I'll take a picture of that hook and I'll compare it to other straight shank hooks. But the really nice thing about that hook compared to other straight shanks is it's got a little bit of a shorter shank, but more gap built for punching. It is, I think, the best designed hook.
Yeah,
for punching.
you have a lot of gap there.
Yep.
So that fish eats that bait, you're
getting them.
pretty good chance you're going to catch him. And that's where the rod comes into play. A lot of times when you're punching, you want to use a heavy action rod.
Yep.
You don't want the rod so heavy that it doesn't have any bend to it. You still want the rod to have a little bit of flex, because I don't think you want to create any slack when you set that hook. The Champion Extreme Dobbins, the 805, to me is one of the best punching rods there is. It's got just enough tip that you can throw the lighter weights, but it's got a lot of backbone, and it keeps the bend in the rod so you don't create a lot of slack when you set that hook.
So you mentioned the rod and fishing it around here. Fishing the punch around here is not maybe the exact same as what guys are doing or seeing on TV, right? You know, you're not punching under 5-6 foot mats.
No,
You're not doing that
3 to 1
4-foot cast, right?
Wait, if you find those, then please send us the waypoints.
Please,
We'd like to have
let us
them.
know. But tell us how you guys are fishing the punch in our area versus what they're maybe seeing on TV.
A lot of times around here, I mean, you can punch right through pads and that, but a lot of times you'll look for you'll have a bunch of pads together and there'll be a little bitty hole. You'll try to feed that bait through that hole. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes it's just a thick mat and there is no holes and you got to bust right through it. You know, so, but it could be literally 3 feet in front of the boat, or it could be 15 to 20 feet in front of the boat. Because a lot of times you might see a fish move under the water and you want to target that fish. It doesn't matter if it's 10, 15, 6 feet. You're going to try to punch right where that movement was. And hopefully that fish will turn on the bait and get it.
You know, for people,
I'd give a couple other examples of when to do it. Number one would be if you get a blow up on a frog and misses it. It's a punch rig is a good follow-up bait. I don't know exactly what the fish is thinking, obviously, but they hit something and now it's died and it's floating down to the bottom and it's sitting on the bottom. They eat it. And the other thing that's locally that sometimes people miss is out in the main current. There'll be a lay down log and there'll be a lot of stuff floated into that and junk, milk jugs and pop bottles and beer cans and weeds and floating eelgrass and all that stuff. And you can punch a main river eddy or a main river lay down laying out into the current, and that weight will get it through right to where that fish is sitting, and there's no other way to catch those fish.
Log jams.
Yeah, on a log jam, and it'll drop right where you throw it. It's going to drop straight down, and sometimes that can be a real good thing if you're in current.
Well, a lot of times right now too, the eelgrass is starting to die off and float down the river. So if there's a log, you might get a big mat of eelgrass, and you can use one of these weights to punch down through it. Because when it gets hot in the summer or hot right now, the sun's out, those fish are going to be attracted to shade, and so isn't the bait fish. So that's where this really comes into play. A lot of people around here really don't think much about punching, but it's a very good technique to have.
You got a current break, you got overhead cover, there's a pretty good chance there's going to be a bass there. And really, some of those are extremely thick mats where you need that 1.5 ounces to get through, because that stuff's been piling up for days.
Yep, and you always, for me, I always use braid. I know there are, once in a while you'll see on the Bassmasters, guys swear to use heavy fluorocarbon because it doesn't make as much noise sometimes, maybe in clearer water, but for the river here, I really haven't with the braid. I would go with braid just because I don't want to take the chance of losing a fish.
Yeah.
So you guys have focused heavily on the river, and I got a little something to add about Lost Grove.
Yeah.
I constantly get asked, how do you catch those fish in the summertime when they're maybe a little deeper than they are not on the bank? And this year, especially at Lost Grove, there was a lot of vegetation in the treetops, and you wouldn't think punching at 40 feet of water could work, but that's also a good way at Lost Grove to fish that really deep, because a punch rig can cover the entire water column and you don't lose as many baits. So go get an ounce and a half weight at Lost Grove, and out in those trees, when the mats are out in the middle of those trees, you'll be surprised what's under there. It's just figuring out what depth they're at.
Right, and the good thing about Lost Grove is it's got so many trees.
Yep.
And it's not always that you're even punching. You just need, when you release the bail, you want the weight big enough to where it'll just track down.
Yep. And a lot of times it's a reaction bite as it's falling really fast. But this year, unlike others, it really seemed to mat up for about a month out in those treetops. And you couldn't flip jigs in there anymore. And that didn't mean you had to quit fishing there. It just meant you maybe needed to go to something like a punch rig. So Chuck mentioned the 805C DX from Dobbins. I use the 766 Flip from Dobbins. It's got a little more backbone, maybe too much for the shallow water punching, like the less than a foot, but it does do really nice at Lost Grove and the deep stuff, because this is a certified broomstick.
Yeah, the tip is a lot stiffer than this. I don't know about the backbone, but the tip is definitely a little more limber on the 805 than the 766.
And I may be mistaken, but I believe they make a 766 in a Sierra or a...
They do. They make a 766 Flip Sierra series,
which is actually a rod that you can buy for around $150.
Yep.
If you're and it would actually, the Sierra might be more of what Chuck's talking about, because it does have a little bit more of a moderate action than the Champ does.
It does. I felt it. It's not.
You'll lose a lot less fish if you do not create slack when you hook the fish.
I use the 795 DX, but mainly because that's what I've had for years, and I like that rod because I can flip anything from about a 3/16 up to an 1.5 ounces, and it's a pretty versatile rod. It's good for punching. I don't lose a lot of fish. It's not quite as powerful as the 805, but we're not dealing with 10-pound bass in Iowa. If I lived in Florida or California or Texas and fishing Sam Rayburn or something, I would definitely advise the 805.
Right. Well, the 795 probably is good up to 1.25 ounces. Yep. And then maybe up to 2 ounce, you'd probably definitely want something like this.
This 766 Flip, I would say, excels in the ounce to 2 ounce range.
And you can get the Dobbins makes a 765 as well, in case you want to double up and maybe use it as a jig rod or maybe a punching rod if you can only get one rod. The 765 would be a great choice too.
So we talked a little bit about rods. Let's quickly touch reels. We didn't talk about much on this for about frogs, but for punching, you want a reel with some strong drag and big line spool capacity. Tell us what you guys are using for reels on punching.
I use the Daiwa Tatula SV in the 8-to-1. You know, there are a lot of guys that will go down to a 7-1, supposedly has a little bit more power, but I like to be able to reel my line up quickly, especially if you do get a bite, reel the slack in, or if you see another fish move somewhere or a blow up and you need to get that bait back to you as quick as possible. That's where I like the 8-to-1.
Yeah, I use at least a 7-to-1, but usually an 8-to-1, either the Tatula or the Coastal. My punching and frog rods tend to overlap a little bit, and especially if I'm like jumping in Chuck's boat or Brady's boat, I may only have one rod or two rods. I have a 736 and maybe a 746 or a 795, and I need to have it used for both. And usually for me an 8-to-1, but
the 736 gets it done too with the punch.
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing for sure too, whatever reel you do use, you want to tighten the drag as tight as possible. You don't want any slippage on the drag. You want it to be cranked down as tight as it'll go.
And when you set the hook and you get that fish moving towards you, you keep it moving towards you until it's either in the net or flipped over the side of the boat.
Keep reeling.
Do not let it get down, because if you let it dig down in there, you're going to get your heart broke.
Yeah. Instead of pulling a 5-pound bass out, you're going to be pulling a 5-pound bass with 20 pounds of slop with it.
Yeah.
So, and that's where accidents happen.
Yeah.
So we've talked gear, we've talked history, we've talked when and why. Let's maybe talk quick about what baits you're using for punching. It seems like there's kind of two schools of thought as far as choosing a soft plastic. One that's not doing a whole lot, and one that maybe has a little flap to it. Tell me about your favorite punching baits.
My 3 favorite punching baits are this is the Yo Mama. I like it in green pumpkin red, black and red flake, or black blue flake. I like dark baits, basically. What's that?
Who makes that bait?
Big Bite makes it. And the Yo Daddy, I use that too. And then I use a Gambler BB Cricket. The Gambler BB Cricket is a pretty slim line bait that has no action at all. Okay. Basically kind of like a Reaction Innovation 4.2 Beaver. Yeah. It's basically has no action. So I think you want both. Have one with a little bit of action and one without any action. I don't think you want a bait though that has too much action, because a lot of times if these are moving too fast, a lot of times they will catch some of the vegetation and you'll have a headache by the end of the day just fighting with it. But a little bit of action and then a bait with no action is perfect for me.
I would agree. I prefer to punch something that has an extremely streamlined body, like a Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver or Yo Mama or a BFE. I don't really worry about the action, honestly. I think that heavy weight makes a lot of action. When it hits the bottom, it hits and shakes, and then you pull it up and you shake it. And even the BB Cricket, which is basically a small crawdad about 3 inches long and fairly stiff plastic, if you're shaking it around, I'm not really sure that you're not attracting them from a long way away. You're flipping it to where they are, and they're either going to eat it or they're not, in my opinion. Yeah. I don't really worry about, and I don't want a lot of appendages off the side, for example, a brush hog I like as a great bait. It's got some side things that I just don't think make it streamlined for punching very well.
Right. The only thing I'll add that you guys didn't hit on, and I know maybe Chuck doesn't agree, this isn't a super shallow punch bait that excels, but I actually like it in the more deeper punching scenarios because it does have a great flap, but the body is completely streamlined for punching, and that's the swimming craw.
I like it at Lost Grove a lot.
Yeah, because this thing
really
flutters hard on the way down.
Yeah.
I'm talking 4+ foot of water punching.
Yeah, when you're like on the river, and we talk about the river a lot,
Yep.
you know, when you're only punching a foot or a couple feet, 3 feet, I mean, those bass, the bait is moving fast with a 1 ounce weight, but those bass grab it instantly.
Faster.
Yeah, you can't move it fast enough when that's dropping through there, and that's really how you determine what the fish want and what weight you want to use is how fast the rate of fall is. That's probably one of the most important parts about.
You brought up a great point,
Yeah.
and that's picking the right size weight.
Exactly.
The rule of
You
thumb
know?
seems to be trying to get away with the least
Right.
amount of weight to get through
To
the
get
mat,
through.
but not immediately thump bottom.
Right. Sometimes you want it to go through faster because that's what the fish want. You don't want them to
Yep.
get a good look at it. Believe it or not, they get a good look at it when it's moving. You know, it's just like a frog. Sometimes they want that frog sitting still, and sometimes they want that frog coming at you as fast as you can reel. You can't reel it fast enough when they want it fast.
Yep.
Well, you have to play every day too, because sometimes you'll flip in there and you'll feel it on the way down, you know. But other times, I've had a few times, you know, where you'll flip it in there, shake it a few times, pull it up, and you pull it right to the bottom of the pads and kind of shake it on the bottom of the pad, and they'll come up and eat it. And if
Yeah. That was this weekend, actually.
Yeah.
I think more so.
And I think
You know?
if you watch, I think it's Bub Tosh has some videos that are they went scuba diving under mats, and what they found is that a lot of the bluegills are up there and they're pecking at the mats, and that's some of that you hear when you're in the mats. And there's also like crawdads, like literally hanging out of the bottom of the pads, like they're
Yeah.
holding on to like they're gonna fall if they don't. And bass will go up there and eat them, and sometimes they're looking up and they're gonna eat those things. And you pull that, you know, they pull that bait all the way up to the pad and then just shake it on the bottom of the pad, and they'll grab it right off there, and you got them.
Yeah.
And so you have to go day by day, and rate of fall is always important.
Right.
But I think in general, like you said, you start with the least
Yeah.
you can get through.
Yep.
And then you figure out if they're biting it on a fall, maybe you lighten up. If they're biting it when you pull it up, you can do whatever weight you want because you just want it through and then pull it up, you know, and
Right.
you just.
And
Yeah.
picking
Just
up-
like your bait, sometimes they want a bigger crawl, and
Yeah.
sometimes they want a smaller, more slimmer
Yeah.
crawl. You gotta, you know, you
And
gotta
the weight
kinda
will tell you
try
if
everything.
you're using the right size weight because it's a defined. You can really feel it get through that mat.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
getting through right,
Yeah.
it's a very little hesitation. But if you're using too little, it might be struggling. You might be going every other gets through.
Mhm.
That means you need to go a little bigger.
Yeah.
And I was so shocked. I went to Gunnersville last fall for pre-fish, whatever. I only had ounce weights, and they laughed at me. They're like, "That's not getting through," and they were right. I got like every
Yeah.
fourth flip through.
Yeah.
Drove myself nuts for 2 hours, and I finally broke down and went and bought 2 ounce weights, and those got through. But
You
it's
know,
just-
I can remember when they used to only have like up to an ounce, and
Yeah.
you'd see guys on the tour flip the bait up about 20 feet in the
Yeah.
air and let it come down as hard as it can to
Yeah.
try to bust
Yeah,
through it.
They pull it down.
Now they, you know, they
Well,
2 ounce
those
weights.
lead weights are about that big
Golf
compared
ball.
to a
Yeah.
tungsten. Yeah, they're.
Yeah. Yep.
well, this was, I think, really informative video on a unique way to catch bass. I really enjoyed it. I actually have a nice clip I might add in here if I can find it from my trip to Florida when I was punching with the 766 flip and the swim and craw. But anything else you guys want to add about punching before we sign off? I think this was a really good video.
I would add one thing. In my opinion, it's probably not a great way to find fish.
No.
It's pretty tedious, and you're gonna want to have a pretty good idea that there's fish in that area because you want to take your time and make a flip every 3 to 4 feet because you're not throwing a buzzbait where it's making all this ruckus and they can find it from 15 feet away. You're landing on their head, and so find an area where you're pretty sure there's fish. Practice in a farm pond where you know there's fish, or somewhere where you're pretty sure that you're going to get some bites, and then and learn it that way.
Or if you're frog fishing, getting bites,
Yeah.
and they're not biting the next day, they're still there.
And have one tied on when you're frog fishing, because that frog,
Good
if they
follow.
blow up on a frog, there's going to be a hole, and you're going to know exactly where you need to pitch that bait to get the follow up.
Yeah, if they don't come back on a frog, throw this in there, and
Yeah.
usually you will get bit because they're ready to feed.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, that was very informative. And again, this strategic angling is brought to you by K&K True Value in Bettendorf, Iowa. Everything pretty much we talked about tonight you can find down there. Punching is a very fun way to catch them, and we all encourage you to go give it a try next time you're scratching your head about where your fish went. So we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.